A proposed bill that may come before lawmakers in Augusta this session could result in the state taking the Bangor Mall by eminent domain. The bill's sponsor, Senator Joe Baldacci of Bangor, says the legislation would authorize Maine Housing the ability to negotiate with the current owners to purchase the mall. Baldacci says if they can't come to an agreement within 18 months, a seizure by the state could be possible. This comes after recent lawsuits from the city of Bangor against the mall's owner regarding general upkeep of the building and surrounding property. Baldacci says the mall could be transformed into some form of affordable housing while also maintaining a commercial space.
I think that over the years, everybody that lives in this area of the state has seen the deterioration of the mall, and what was once a really busy commercial center has deteriorated into an eyesore with a lot of empty storefronts, a lot of empty spaces, letting the infrastructure, the parking, the structure itself of the mall, structural integrity of that building lapse.
The bill is currently going through the revisor's office before officially being introduced. Baldacci says the major challenge with getting the bill passed will be the cost.